At the southernmost tip of the African continent, where two oceans meet, rich in diamond and gold deposits, and blessed with breathtaking natural beauty, South Africa had been home to diverse tribes and cultures for thousands of years. These lands boasted a deep history, stretching from the Khoisan people to the Zulu warriors. However, in the mid-17th century, with the arrival of Dutch seafarers at the Cape of Good Hope, this rich geography would become the stage for centuries of colonialism and racial segregation. This was the beginning of an epic story where human dignity would face one of its toughest tests, but ultimately, hope and reconciliation would triumph. In 1652, the Dutch, led by Jan van Riebeeck, arrived in South Africa with the aim of establishing a supply station at the Cape of Good Hope. However, this small settlement quickly expanded, beginning to seize the lands of the indigenous people. The Khoisan people lost their lands and way of life to the advancing Dutch settlers, Boers or Afrikaners. This was not merely a territorial occupation, but also the beginning of the systematic destruction of the indigenous people's identity and culture. By the late 18th century, the British also began to show interest in the region and seized the Cape of Good Hope in 1806. This led to tensions between the Dutch settlers, Boers, and the British, while both colonial powers engaged in bloody wars with indigenous African tribes, especially with the powerful Zulu kingdom. Despite the superior firepower of the British, Zulu warriors resisted bravely, achieving epic victories such as the Battle of Isandlwana. However, they were eventually defeated by the military might of the British. In the late 19th century, the discovery of diamond and gold deposits in South Africa increased the British desire for control over the region. This led to two bloody wars between the British and the Boers, Boer Wars, 1880-1881 and 1899-1902. To break the Boer resistance, the British established concentration camps, causing the deaths of thousands of Boer women and children. At the end of the war, the British emerged victorious and consolidated their hegemony over the region by establishing the Union of South Africa in 1910. With the National Party coming to power in 1948, a rigid system of racial segregation called Apartheid was officially implemented in South Africa. Black Africans, colored people, and those of Indian descent were deprived of their most basic human rights. The white minority held all political and economic power in the country, while blacks were confined to townships, deprived of education, healthcare, and job opportunities. Marriages were forbidden, and even buses, benches, and beaches were segregated by race. This was one of the most shameful regimes of racial discrimination in human history. Resistance against the apartheid regime grew under the leadership of the African National Congress, ANC. On March 21, 1960, police opened fire on unarmed black demonstrators protesting passport laws in the town of Sharpeville. 69 people were killed, and hundreds were wounded. This massacre caused a great international outcry and led the ANC to shift from peaceful resistance to armed struggle. Leaders like Nelson Mandela were imprisoned during this period, but the flame of resistance did not die out. The armed wing of the ANC, Umkhonto we Sizwe, Spear of the Nation, began to carry out sabotage acts. Nelson Mandela was sentenced to life imprisonment in 1964, but his struggle became a symbol worldwide. The United Nations imposed sanctions on South Africa, and international sports and cultural organizations boycotted the country. The apartheid regime became increasingly isolated internationally, but internal oppression continued. The final years of the apartheid regime were marked by bloody clashes. Internal conflicts among black communities, government provocations, and police brutality claimed thousands of lives. The struggle for freedom meant fighting not only against the colonizer, but also against internal division and violence. Mandela's 27 years in prison showed the whole world how heavy the price of freedom was. With increasing international pressure and internal resistance, the South African government was forced to implement reforms. In 1990, Nelson Mandela was released from prison. This event marked the beginning of the end of the apartheid regime. Mandela and President F.W. de Klerk worked together for a peaceful transition. Racial segregation laws were abolished, and the first democratic elections involving all races were held in 1994. Nelson Mandela was elected as South Africa's first black president. The country entered a new era, known as the Rainbow Nation, where different races and cultures lived together in peace. The streets filled with celebrations, and the spirit of reconciliation and forgiveness prevailed, leaving behind years of pain and hatred. South Africa showed the whole world that racial segregation could be overcome and that peace was possible. The story of South Africa shows how a beacon of hope can emerge from one of humanity's darkest periods. Mandela's legacy taught the world the power of forgiveness and reconciliation. But long before this modern struggle, how did another great civilization across the ocean face its fate against conquerors, driven by a lust for gold? In our next video, we will witness the tragic collapse of the magnificent Aztec Empire and the bloody history written on the lands of Mexico. Stay tuned.